Hey guys, I'm Dr. Kim Sage. Welcome to my channel. This channel is all about mental health and relationships and trauma and attachment and CPTSD and everything related to sort of how we live our lives and how we got here and where we want to go mentally, physically, and emotionally. So welcome. So I've been doing a lot of videos around what I call mama trauma. And it really is sort of a cluster of experiences that adult children, or at least teen to adult, children begin to understand about their parents and often their mothers, right? It's about having a parent with BPD or narcissism or some form of a PD or disorder or depression or, just some dynamic that was generally repetitive, generally chronic, typical more CPTSD, interpersonal trauma, a situation where you should have been safe or your parent should have been there or reliable. Perhaps you were abandoned, perhaps you were adopted, perhaps it really could go in lots of different ways. And so I'd like to expand more, even just beyond the sort of, the more typical mama trauma videos I've talked about. And so I wanted to sort of kick off this video in an even more generalized way, which I'm calling papa trauma. And this really is about the different types of father wounds that we can have. Now, of course, we have evolved in our ways of thinking about two-parent households or men or women or whatever that is. But an ideal situation, I think, is that you at a minimum have two parents. This is ideal, which is not happening for most people, but for many people. But ideally you have two parents, one that helps the other, right? It provides extra resources and support. Maybe that other parent provides accountability to a parent who is, say, out of control. But in many cases, it's not that way. In many cases, even in two-parent households, one or both of the parents are left unchecked, enabled in their behavior, and it's chronic and wounding and hurtful. And so I really wanted to talk about sort of what the different ways are we might have some type of father wound, or what I'm going to call papa trauma. And then I would like to make videos, that's my plan, to make videos about each one of the topics in some way. And so we can use that as we explore further. Also, like I was going to say, I got sidetracked there, was that in the historical sense of mother and father, you had this idea that masculine and feminine energy occurred. Now, this could be in a same-sex couple or not, but that one parent or both had a nurturing quality and one parent or both had more of that pushing independent quality for the child. And that's what the research often shows, is that dads, and maybe it's because of society's role, we could argue, in historical culture, but tend to be a little more, in a general way, the research shows, more likely to, do more physical things with kids, push them to expand their horizons, and that mother is always that safe, nurturing place, and dad should be too. So I don't want you to take it that I'm saying mom or dad, but ideally you have these energies, right? At a minimum, you're getting sort of both of them. But if you have, no father or a certain kind of father, and as I always say, no parent is perfect or anywhere close. But when you have a repetitive nature of ongoing behaviors, it does create a certain sense for you. It sort of creates a situation where your sense of value. Are you worthy or not? Can you rely on people or not? Can you rely on the opposite gendered or same gendered parent or not? What does it say about relationships and what kind of relationships you're going to have and who you're attracted to, right? All of this is the root of attachment, which is that these early experiences we have, even if we don't have them with a parent, lay the groundwork potentially for the ways we engage with ourselves in the world in terms of our relationships and all those kinds of things. So let's talk about the different ways. I think there are about 11 different ones I could come up with. If I've forgotten any, please feel free to post and share. But these are the common ways that I see what I call papa trauma. The first one is the enabling father, right? Or the enabling father dynamic. And this is a situation where the father enables the bad behavior of the partner in some way. They don't necessarily stop it or defend it. They don't hurt you in the same way, but because they, by their inaction, by their neglect of taking care of you and protecting you from the, let's say, BPD parent or the narcissistic parent, this father is an enabling father. He's often seen as a less aggressive father, but he may be a father who is very successful or not. But at the core, he lacks the internal structure to not only, stop the behavior from the the wife or the husband, but he enables the behavior by never really protecting the kids from it, making excuses, justifying it, looking the other way, gaslighting, whatever it is. The second one is the father who is absent but present, right? So this father is absent but present, so he's technically comes home every day, but he's completely disengaged. He's more like a robot that comes and goes, or he is actually physically not there and has abandoned you. But there's an absence to him. There's no real texture and dynamic to who he is. And that can show up in a sense where you're like, well, I had two parents, but my dad is not somebody I ever discuss my feelings with. He never gets involved in anything. He just kind of looks up from what he's doing. He's just a disengaged father in that regard. Even if he checks all the boxes and volunteers for, the fundraisers or things like that. He's just technically or emotionally, he's just really not there. The next one is the rageful or angry father. And this is the dad type that is just always mad, right? He's always upset. Something's always wrong. He has a short temper. He blows at the spouse or the partner. He blows at his kids. He might call his partner names. He might call his kids names. He might mock them or criticize them in a very aggressive, angry way. It's a very walking on eggshells kind of situation where you just never know what you're going to get. And you often live in a state of hypervigilance because you're always on guard for when dad is going to be mad. The next one is the more critical and controlling type of parent. So this parent is often not so much loud and angry and aggressive, but they just have always something to point out that you didn't do right, that you could do differently, that you could have done better, and or they often can be controlling. And so they're controlling of the spouse, of the kids. It's like his way or the highway kind of situation. And they might be successful, they might not. Oftentimes they are successful on some level because they're always trying to control and manage things, and they're always looking for what went wrong. And some jobs really reward this behavior, right? If you're good at finding all the problems at work, that's a great thing for work. It's not so great for when you go home from work and tell your wife and your kids the million things they didn't do the right way or could do better and things like that. The next one is the addicted or sort of substance abusing kind of father, who maybe he's the happy, fun party guy, he always acts crazy and gets drunk. Everyone loves this guy. But he always does stuff that's embarrassing, right? There's always a price to pay for that. And or he is the kind of a substance user who, leaves out inappropriate things like bongs or whatever, weed, or he, gets drunk and then comes home and rages at the kids or the spouse. But the substance abuse or the addiction is a lot of what the issues are. And the family and the system and the kids usually are very aware that dad has too much wine, too much beer, too much weed, whatever it is, does coke. It's just very clear that this kind of dad is living his life through the lens of his substance abuse. The next one would be the chronically unstable father. And this is the father who is always mentally unstable, physically unstable. He's sick a lot. He can't keep his job a lot. He's got mental health issues. He's never happy. He's just chronically unstable. And so he might be good for a while, but then eventually he's not. And that seems to always be a pattern. It's always something with a dad like this. And it's really hard to feel a sense of security as a kid when the adult who's supposed to contain and hold everything and feel bigger than you are and can handle it all, when he perpetually seems unable to do so. The next one I actually mentioned earlier, I'm just going to keep my 11, which is the abandoned dad. But this is really the dad that was maybe, present in your life and then left, or there at birth and left, or maybe was completely around until you were 15 and then left because your parents had a divorce. And this kind of abandonment is permanent, lifelong, never came back again, never saw the guy again. Maybe he died, maybe he didn't, but he's completely abandoned in all regards. So he was never sort of there or not there. He's just completely abandoned the family, and you will never see or hear, or you never do see or hear from him again. And of course, that kind of loss and trauma is a different issue. It's this longing for, what would it have been like if they had been around? In fact, that's true for all of these. And let me just say this really quickly, that all of these can double layer and multi-layer. So it's not one category, but I would say that, in certain clusters of disorders, you will see more of these than others. But I just kind of want to separate them so that we're kind of clear what we're talking about and how each of those things can affect us. And then of course the next one is, like I said, that the parent actually dies while they are with the child. So there's a massive grief, a massive loss from a car accident or from an illness. And there's a death there that has to be recovered from. And so there's a grieving and longing for the dad that you had that could have been, but it is a permanent loss because there is no chance that he might come back, that he might change, that he might get better. And that is actually what the research shows. In some ways, losing a parent from a death, it's all awful. But in some of the ways, it can be, it's hard to say this in the right way, but the research shows it can be easier to recover over time because there is a significant event, there's the death, there's the grief, and then there's the sort of like acceptance potentially. But with some of these fathers where it's like they're there, they're not there, they're hurtful, they're not, they're abusive, they're not. It's like that chronic wounding that never ends makes it really hard to sort of contain the wound and try in some way, not necessarily to accept it, but to even live alongside it because you are just trying to deal with it and survive in it year after year, month after month, day after day. The next one is the divorced dad or disengaged dad through divorce. It's often this split that happens in a divorce. And it's not just that the parents are split and that they're managing things, but that there's a lot of chaos with this dad and or he's disengaged and or he blows things up. And it's a constant battle between the parents, between the chronicness of the family, this chronic nature of suffering, I should say, that occurs specifically related to divorce. And for many kids, they're going along in life, their parents weren't that happy, and then the split happens and it's just this wide, massive wound, this bleeding wound that never ends. And so it's different to have a divorce, which is still, to be honest, hard for kids, but this one thing when things could be managed. But as this bleeding wound can stay open, many people live in that. A lot of their trauma is about what happened in the divorce between the parents and or the unsafe things that happen or the different things that happen. I often tell parents that when parents get divorced, especially parents in my practice who say didn't have divorced parents themselves, it's like the two homes become, in this home we speak French, and this home we speak Japanese, right? It literally becomes so opposite, and the kids have to decide like, which country am I in? Which house am I in? And if it's like decently okay, then they manage it. But this thing where, kids are so resilient, like I always say this, I think it's nonsense because I think that kids just don't share their wounds so easily. But make no mistake, it is really hard for kids. And the more contentious it is, the harder it is. And lastly, the dad is often this victimized, poor me. It's like kind of covert narcissistic dad where everything is about like, life is so hard for me, whether they're married or not. They just have this sort of negative, wounded dynamic that everything is just always about them and how they didn't get what they needed or they're not enough or no one appreciates them. They just walk around with this huge like victim sign on their head. And they just are always looking for sympathy and if you just understood them, that kind of thing. So those are my top 11, I think, ways that I see people have these wounds with papa trauma. And like I did say a few minutes ago, I forgot to say in the beginning that they can definitely layer and overlap. In most cases, they almost always do. But I think it helps to start to get clear about where your wound lies because some of the wounds have different dynamics in terms of how we think about healing them. Yes, at the core, it's a lot of grief and loss and longing, and that is probably the biggest connection with all of them. But sometimes, like I said, it can be different if your wound is about divorce versus death or about, the guy was in my house every day, but I have no idea who he is and how that affects you today versus the kind of guy that was the greatest dad ever and was sadly killed in a car accident, right? So all of those are worthy of support. And so I hope you will know that you are worthy of healing and support. And please feel free to subscribe and click the bell if you'd like to get notified of when I post new videos. I am truly so grateful. And I really appreciate the things that you guys share and just make sure you're safe in doing that. But thank you so much. And so I will see you soon. Bye guys, take care.